The playground smells like rain and rust, the swings creaking in the October wind as dusk bleeds the last light from the sky. I should have left 10 minutes ago, but I was reviewing lesson plans on the bench, reluctant to return to my empty apartment, and that hesitation saves a life. Movement catches my peripheral vision near the edge of the park, where the streetlights haven't flickered on yet. A man crouching beside a small boy by the slide, his hand gripping the child's arm too tightly, pulling him toward the parking lot. Everything in me goes still and sharp. The boy is resisting, his small voice rising in protest, and the man is looking around with quick, jerky movements that scream wrong. My body moves before my brain fully processes, muscle memory from a childhood spent learning to recognize danger. I shout, "Hey," and start running. My keys already threading through my fingers the way my foster mother taught me when I turned 16. The man's head snaps toward me, and I see calculation flash across his face, weighing whether I'm worth the risk. He decides I'm not. He shoves the boy down hard on the mulch and sprints toward a dark sedan idling at the curb. I scream louder, screaming for help, for anyone, my voice echoing off the empty basketball courts. The sedan peels away, and I reach the child, dropping to my knees beside him. He's crying but trying not to, his face scrunched with the effort of being brave, and something about that composure in someone so small breaks my heart. I pull him against me, checking for injuries, my hands shaking with adrenaline. He's maybe 5 years old, dark hair and enormous gray eyes, wearing clothes that look expensive even to my untrained eye, a wool coat with actual buttons, not snaps, leather shoes, not sneakers. I ask his name and he whispers, "Nicholas." I tell him he's safe now, that I'm a teacher, that we're going to find his parents. When I ask where they are, his face crumples. My nanny was supposed to be watching me, but she was on her phone and I wanted to go on the slide. My father is always working. The words land with a weight that feels too heavy for a kindergartner to carry. I fish my phone from my pocket and dial 911 with trembling fingers, keeping Nicholas tucked against my side. Police arrive within 6 minutes, unusually fast, followed by an ambulance Nicholas doesn't need. I give my statement to a detective who writes down everything with careful precision. His eyes sharp and assessing when he looks at me. He asks Nicholas his last name, and the boy says Montague. The detective's pen stops moving. He exchanges a glance with his partner, something significant passing between them that I don't understand. I ask if they've contacted his father, and the detective says someone is handling it personally, his tone suggesting I shouldn't ask more questions. As they prepare to take Nicholas to be checked at the hospital, I notice black SUVs circling the block, tinted windows reflecting the now lit street lamps, moving in a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Nicholas hugs me before he leaves, his small arms tight around my neck, and whispers thank you. I watch them drive away and give my contact information to the detective, then walk to my car on legs that feel disconnected from my body. The entire drive home, I can't shake the sensation of being watched, of eyes tracking my movement through the darkening streets. My apartment building has never looked so exposed, every shadow a potential threat. Inside, I lock the door and lean against it, my keys still clutched in my fist, and finally let myself shake. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. The call comes through at 7:43 in the evening, while Alexander Montague is reviewing shipping manifests in his downtown office, the kind of call that stops his heart mid-beat. His security chief, Philip Langley's voice tight with controlled urgency, saying there was an incident at the playground and Nicholas is safe now. But there was an attempt, and Alexander is moving before Philip finishes the sentence, barking orders into his phone as he strides toward the elevator. His mind a cold, burning mix of rage and terror that threatens to consume rational thought. His son was targeted. His 5-year-old son was nearly taken, and his multi-million-dollar security apparatus failed catastrophically to prevent a man from getting his hands on the most precious thing in Alexander's carefully controlled world. He reaches the hospital in 11 minutes, a drive that should take 25, his driver knowing better than to observe speed limits tonight, and Philip meets him at a private entrance with a tablet already cued to surveillance footage and a preliminary report that makes Alexander want to put his fist through concrete. The Ravenscrofts are the obvious suspects. Thomas Ravenscroft has been pushing against Alexander's territory for 6 months, testing boundaries and challenging agreements that have held for a decade. And taking Nicholas would be exactly the kind of bold, vicious move Thomas would consider strategic. But what stops Alexander cold is the next part of Philip's report, the part about the civilian woman who intervened, who fought off a trained operative with nothing but keys and fury, who stayed with Nicholas until police arrived. Alexander demands to see the footage, and Philip plays it on the tablet. Grainy parking lot camera quality, but clear enough to show a slender woman in a cardigan sprinting toward his son, screaming loud enough to draw attention, scaring off the kidnapper through sheer unexpected resistance. Alexander watches her drop to her knees beside Nicholas, watches her pull his son against her body with the instinctive protectiveness of a mother, watches her check him for injuries with gentle, thorough hands, and something shifts in his chest. Something he has not felt since Catherine died 3 years ago. He makes Philip replay the footage 4 times, studying the woman's face, the determined set of her jaw, the way she positions herself between Nicholas and any potential threat, even after the attacker has fled. Philip provides her information. Emma Thornhill, 28 years old, kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary. No criminal record, no apparent connection to any organization or family, a complete innocent who happened to be in the right place at the right moment. Alexander orders a complete background check and protective surveillance on her immediately because either she is genuinely a hero or she is a very skilled plant, and he needs to know which before he proceeds. He goes to Nicholas next, finding his son in a private examination room with a pediatrician Alexander keeps on retainer, and the moment Nicholas sees him, the boy bursts into tears, the brave composure finally cracking. Alexander lifts him carefully, holding him against his chest, feeling the small body shake with sobs, and allows himself 30 seconds of pure vulnerability. His eyes closing as he breathes in the scent of his son's shampoo and thanks a God he stopped believing in years ago. Nicholas talks through his tears about the pretty teacher who saved him, about how she smelled like vanilla and told him he was safe, and promised to find his daddy. And Alexander commits every detail to memory. When Nicholas finally falls asleep against his shoulder, Alexander carries him to the waiting SUV and takes him home to the estate, the fortress he built after Catherine's death. 10 acres surrounded by walls and cameras and armed men who failed their most basic duty tonight. He tucks Nicholas into bed personally, something he does too rarely, his empire demanding constant attention that steals him from these quiet father moments, and sits watching his son sleep until his phone buzzes with the preliminary background report on Emma Thornhill. He reads it standing in the hallway, learning about her childhood in foster care, her scholarship to State University, her 4 years teaching at an underfunded public school, her small apartment and modest life, and finds no red flags, no connections, nothing but a good woman living a quiet existence until she collided with his world. Alexander makes a decision that surprises even his most trusted advisors when he tells Philip to arrange a meeting. He needs to look Emma Thornhill in the eyes, needs to assess whether she is a threat or a pawn, or exactly what she appears to be, a rare creature in his experience, someone genuinely good. He owes her a debt for saving Nicholas, a debt that in his world carries weight and obligation, but more than that, he needs to understand the woman who threw herself into danger for a stranger's child, who stayed when running would have been smarter. The footage plays again in his mind, her body shielding his son, her voice fierce and unafraid, and Alexander realizes he is curious in a way he has not been curious about anyone in years, drawn to her courage and the glimpse of light she represents, so foreign to the darkness he inhabits. The school day stretches like taffy. every minute elongated by exhaustion and nerves that won't settle no matter how many deep breaths Emma forces into her lungs. Her students sense something off, their 5- and 6-year-old intuition picking up on her distraction, and she catches herself jumping when the classroom door opens for the art teacher, her heart hammering against her ribs like it's trying to escape. During lunch, she sits in the break room nursing coffee she doesn't taste while her colleague Jennifer chatters about weekend plans, and Emma nods at appropriate intervals, while her mind replays the feeling of Nicholas's small body against hers, the terror in his eyes, the black SUVs circling with predatory patience. She checks her phone compulsively, even though she doesn't know what she's expecting. Some confirmation that yesterday was real and not a fever dream born from too many true crime podcasts. At 2:15, the office assistant appears at her classroom door with a message that Principal Davis wants to see her immediately, and Emma's stomach drops through the floor, because immediate summons are never good news. She leaves her students with a worksheet and walks to the administrative office on unsteady legs, running through possibilities, wondering if somehow yesterday's incident will cost her this job she loves. Principal Davis smiles when Emma enters, which is more unsettling than reassuring, and gestures to a chair with the kind of careful courtesy usually reserved for parents who donate to the PTA. The principal explains that the Montague Foundation has made an extraordinarily generous donation to Riverside Elementary, enough to fund new computers for every classroom and repair the playground equipment that's been broken for 2 years. And the foundation specifically requested that Emma Thornhill be formally commended for her bravery in protecting a child from harm. Emma's mouth goes dry as Principal Davis continues, praising her quick thinking and courage, saying the foundation representative was very insistent that Emma be recognized, and there's a gleam in the principal's eyes that suggests she's already calculating how to leverage this connection for future donations. Emma manages appropriate responses, "Thank you," and "I just did what anyone would do," while her mind races because this attention feels wrong, feels like being marked, like she's been noticed by something vast and dangerous that should have passed over her unremarked. She escapes the office as quickly as politeness allows and makes it through the final hour of school on autopilot, her smile plastic as she dismisses her students to the pickup area. Walking to her car in the staff parking lot, Emma notices the vehicle immediately because it's impossible to miss. A sleek black town car that doesn't belong among the teacher's sensible sedans and aging hatchbacks, and leaning against it is a man in a charcoal suit who straightens when he sees her approaching. He's polite when he intercepts her path, his voice respectful but firm, as he says that Mr. Montague would like to thank her personally for her service to his family, and would she please come with him. Every instinct Emma has developed through a childhood of reading danger in adults' faces screams at her to run, to get in her car and drive away. But she's paralyzed by the certainty that refusing this invitation would be more dangerous than accepting it, that she's already too far inside something she doesn't understand to extract herself cleanly. She rides in the back of the town car with her purse clutched against her ribs like a shield, watching unfamiliar streets slide past tinted windows, while the driver navigates with the smooth efficiency of someone who does this frequently. And Emma wonders distantly if she should have told someone where she was going, left some record in case she disappears. But who would she tell, and what would she say when she doesn't know herself where this path leads? The restaurant appears elegant, even from outside, its facade understated wealth, the kind of place where Emma would never think to make a reservation, even for a special occasion. And it's clearly closed despite the early evening hour. No other patrons visible through the pristine windows, just staff moving with quiet purpose in the background. The driver opens her door, and Emma steps onto the sidewalk on legs that feel disconnected from her body. Following the suited man through the entrance where a hostess greets them with a professional smile that doesn't reach her eyes, leading Emma through the empty dining room toward a private area in the back. And with each step, Emma's heart climbs higher in her throat until she can barely breathe past it. He's waiting in a room that's all dark wood and soft lighting, standing beside a table set for two, and Emma's breath catches because Nicholas's father is perhaps the most devastatingly handsome man she's ever seen in person. Tall and broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit that probably costs more than her monthly rent. Dark hair swept back from a face of sharp, elegant angles. But it's his eyes that stop her, pale gray like winter sky, cold and assessing as they lock onto her with an intensity that makes her want to step backward. Alexander Montague extends his hand, and Emma shakes it automatically, his grip firm and warm, his palm slightly rough in a way that surprises her given the obvious wealth. And his voice when he speaks is low and controlled, thanking her formally for her service to his family, for protecting his son when his own people failed to do so. Emma mumbles something inadequate about anyone would have done the same, though they both know that's not true. Most people would have pulled out their phones to record rather than intervene, and she tries to extract her hand, but he holds it a moment longer, studying her face with such focused attention that heat crawls up her neck. He gestures to the chair, and Emma sits because her knees are unreliable, and Alexander takes the seat across from her rather than at the head of the table, close enough that she can smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that makes her think of forests and dark earth. A waiter appears with wine that Emma didn't order, pouring it into crystal glasses before disappearing, and Alexander raises his glass in a toast to her courage, his eyes never leaving hers. And Emma takes a sip because it gives her something to do with her shaking hands, the wine rich and complex on her tongue, probably worth more than her weekly grocery budget. She wants to leave, wants to escape the weight of his attention and the dangerous beauty of him, and the way her body responds traitorously to his proximity, despite every alarm bell ringing in her head. But instead, she meets his eyes with what she hopes looks like calm composure and asks what he really wants, because men like him don't arrange private meetings in closed restaurants just to say thank you. Emma drives home from the restaurant with her mind spinning like a carousel that's broken free of its moorings. The photographs Alexander showed her burned into her memory, grainy surveillance images of her at the playground and walking to her car and entering her apartment building, proof that someone was watching and documenting and planning something she doesn't want to imagine. Her apartment is on the third floor of a converted Victorian that's seen better decades, the kind of place where the radiators clank and the floors creak, and the rent is just barely manageable on a teacher's salary, and she climbs the stairs on autopilot, her keys clutched between her fingers the way she held them when she fought off Nicholas's attacker, a makeshift weapon that feels pathetically inadequate now that she understands the scope of what she's stumbled into. Inside her small living room with its thrift store furniture and shelves of children's books and framed photographs of her students, Emma deadbolts the door and checks the windows, noticing for the first time how exposed she is, how easily someone could break the old locks or shatter the thin glass. She makes chamomile tea because it's what she does when anxious, a ritual of normalcy, but her hands shake so badly she nearly drops the mug, and Alexander's words echo in her skull like a warning bell that won't stop ringing. You're already involved whether you like it or not. They know who you are now. She tells herself this isn't her problem, that she saved a child and that should be the end of it, that she didn't sign up for whatever violent world Alexander Montague inhabits with his cold gray eyes and his expensive suits and his casual discussion of people who want to hurt his family. But Nicholas's face won't leave her mind, his small arms around her neck, his whispered thank you, the trust in his eyes when he looked at her like she was someone safe in a dangerous world, and Emma realizes with sinking certainty that she's already attached to a child who isn't hers, already invested in his safety in a way that makes walking away feel like abandonment. She moves to the window and looks down at the street, and her breath freezes because there's a dark sedan parked across the road that wasn't there when she came home. And even from 3 floors up, she can see the shape of someone in the driver's seat, just sitting there, watching. The tea goes cold in her hands as she stands frozen by the window, afraid to move, afraid to look away, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it hurts. Hours crawl past, and Emma considers calling the police. But what would she say? That a car is parked legally on a public street? That she's paranoid because a mafia boss told her she might be in danger? They'd think she was hysterical or delusional. Near midnight, when exhaustion is making her eyes blur, a sharp knock on her door sends adrenaline flooding through her system like ice water, and she approaches the peephole with her phone in hand, 911 already dialed and waiting for her to press call. Through the distorted fisheye lens, she sees Alexander Montague standing in her dingy hallway looking completely out of place in his tailored suit, alone without the security she expected. And every instinct wars between relief and terror as she slides the chain lock into place and opens the door the 4 inches the chain allows, her voice shakier than she wants when she asks what he's doing here. His expression through the gap in the door is tense and urgent, shadows under those pale gray eyes that suggest he hasn't slept either, and his voice comes low and controlled when he tells her his men spotted 2 Ravenscroft associates watching her building 20 minutes ago, circling like sharks, scenting blood, and he's moving her tonight because waiting until morning might mean there is no morning. Emma argues through the narrow opening that she can't just abandon her life because of his criminal activities, her voice rising with a hysteria she can't quite suppress. But Alexander steps closer to the gap until she can feel the heat radiating from him, and his voice drops to something intimate and desperate as he says his son is alive because of her, which means he owes her a debt he can never repay. In his world, debts matter more than anything. They're the currency that keeps the balance, but more than obligation. And his voice catches almost imperceptibly on the words, he cannot have her blood on his conscience, cannot lie awake knowing he let her die when he had the power to prevent it. The raw honesty in his admission breaks through her resistance like a hammer through glass, and Emma sees past the dangerous, beautiful exterior to something wounded and desperate underneath. A man who has lost people before and cannot bear to lose another. She closes the door and slides the chain free and opens it fully, and Alexander's shoulders drop fractionally with relief as he steps inside her small apartment, looking around at her modest life with an expression she cannot read. Emma tells him to wait while she packs and moves through her bedroom on autopilot, throwing clothes into a duffel bag along with her laptop and phone charger and the framed photo of her kindergarten class, the practical motions keeping panic at bay. When she emerges, Alexander takes the bag from her without asking, his hand brushing hers and sending electricity up her arm despite everything. And he guides her down the back stairs with a hand at the small of her back, protective and possessive in equal measure. A different car waits in the alley behind her building, engine running, and Alexander opens the door for her before sliding in beside her, instead of taking the front passenger seat, close enough in the confined space that his thigh presses against hers. The driver pulls away smoothly, and Emma watches her building disappear through the rear window, wondering if she'll ever see it again. If this choice is the end of her normal life, or just a temporary interruption, though something deep in her chest whispers that nothing will ever be normal again. Alexander's phone buzzes constantly with messages he answers in terse monosyllables, coordinating something complex, and Emma realizes this extraction was planned with military precision, multiple moving parts synchronized to keep her safe. The knowledge that he mobilized his entire organization for her sends confusing warmth through her chest, even as terror makes her hands shake, and when Alexander notices her trembling, he reaches over and takes her hand in his grip warm and steady, and surprisingly gentle for a man capable of the violence she knows he commands. The penthouse becomes her world over the following days, a gilded cage that somehow feels more like home than her apartment ever did. And Emma surprises herself by how quickly she adapts to the rhythm of breakfast with Nicholas at the marble kitchen island, and video teaching her students from the guest bedroom that's been converted into her temporary workspace. Maintaining the normalcy she needs, even as everything else in her life has shifted into something unrecognizable. She sets up her laptop among the expensive furniture and teaches her kindergartners their letters and numbers, while Nicholas does his own lessons with his tutor in the next room. And during breaks, the boy finds her, and they read stories together on the leather couch, his small body tucked against her side, in a way that makes her chest ache with protective tenderness. Alexander appears more frequently than she expects, arriving at the penthouse during hours when he should be managing whatever empire he controls, and she catches him watching her with Nicholas, with an expression that's hunger and longing and something almost like hope, as though she's brought something into his sterile, controlled world that he didn't know was missing. She transforms the space without meaning to, leaving books on the coffee table and making hot chocolate in the pristine kitchen and opening curtains to let sunlight flood the rooms that were kept dim and cave-like before her arrival. Small human touches that make the penthouse feel lived in rather than just defended. Nicholas laughs more, bright giggles that ring through the halls when Emma plays games with him or makes silly voices reading his favorite stories. And she notices Alexander pause whenever he hears that sound, his controlled expression cracking to reveal the father underneath the feared crime lord. On the fourth afternoon, his lieutenant James Crawford arrives for a meeting, and Alexander directs him to the office. But Emma is in the kitchen making lunch, and the men don't close the door fully, their voices carrying as they discuss retribution against Ravenscroft associates and territorial disputes and plans that involve words like leverage and elimination and permanent solutions. Ice floods Emma's veins as she realizes exactly what kind of business Alexander conducts, the violence underlying his controlled exterior, and when James leaves and Alexander emerges looking for her, she confronts him in the living room with shaking hands and demands to know what he really does, what he really is beyond the vague implications and careful omissions. He could lie and she would probably believe him because she wants to believe him. But something in his expression shifts and hardens, and he tells her the truth in a flat voice devoid of justification. That he controls organized crime throughout the eastern seaboard, that he inherited his father's empire at 22 and has spent 15 years expanding it, that he's ordered men killed and territories taken and done things that would horrify her if she knew the details. Emma's heart pounds as she processes this confirmation of what she suspected but didn't want to believe, and she expects to feel fear or disgust, but instead she asks why, the question surprising them both. No one has asked him why in 15 years, and the question cracks something open in Alexander's carefully constructed armor as he moves to the window overlooking the city lights, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension as he tells her about inheriting his father's empire at 22, when a rival family executed both his parents in their own home, and he had to choose between taking control or watching everything collapse into war that would consume hundreds of innocent people caught in the crossfire. His voice is flat and controlled as he explains that Nicholas's mother, Sophia, was his attempt at normalcy, a relationship that started before he fully understood the weight of the crown he wore. And she died 3 years ago, when a car bomb meant for Alexander detonated while she was running an errand, just a random Tuesday afternoon, that destroyed everything good he thought he could protect. He's trapped in a life he can't escape without endangering everyone he loves, because walking away would create a power vacuum that would turn the eastern seaboard into a bloodbath. And staying means being the monster who makes the hard choices so others don't have to. The man who orders death so that some twisted version of peace can exist in the underworld he controls. Emma listens and sees the prison he's built around himself, recognizes the walls because she built her own from different materials, but for the same reason. And before she can think better of it, she tells him about growing up in foster care, moving between 7 families before she aged out of the system, never belonging anywhere long enough to put down roots or trust that she wouldn't be uprooted again. She became a teacher to give children the safety and consistency she never had, to be the adult who showed up every day and meant it when she said she cared, and she spent her entire adult life building walls to avoid the hurt of connection because leaving is easier when you never fully arrive. They're both protectors, she realizes aloud, just with vastly different methods and scales, him with violence and territory, and her with picture books and patience. But the core impulse is identical, the desperate need to shield others from the pain they themselves have endured. The conversation stretches into the night as they migrate to the couch, unexpected intimacy building in the quiet penthouse, with only dim lighting and the distant city sounds filtering through bulletproof glass. And Alexander sits closer than necessary, their thighs almost touching, the space between them charged with possibility. When Emma shivers from emotion rather than cold, Alexander drapes his suit jacket over her shoulders without asking, and she pulls it close, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne layered over something warmer and essentially him, the gesture feeling more intimate than it should, more revealing than any words. Alexander admits quietly that he hasn't talked to anyone like this since before Sophia died, that his life is meetings and strategy and violence with no room for actual human connection. And Emma sees the grief he carries like a second skeleton, the isolation of his position that makes him untouchable in every sense. She reaches out and touches his hand where it rests on his thigh, meaning only comfort, but electricity arcs between them at the contact, sharp and undeniable, and Alexander's eyes darken as his gaze drops to her lips. The air thickens with tension, every breath feeling too loud, and he leans closer with agonizing slowness, giving her time to retreat, to remember all the reasons this is dangerous and complicated and probably a mistake. She doesn't move away. The kiss starts gentle and questioning, his lips soft against hers as though she might break. But then something ignites between them, and it transforms into desperate need, his hand cupping the back of her neck while her fingers grip his shirt, pulling him closer as years of loneliness and hunger pour into the contact. Then Alexander pulls back abruptly, jaw clenched and breathing ragged, and tells her roughly that she deserves better than a criminal who brings danger to everyone he touches, who will only drag her further into darkness she should run from while she still can. Emma's heart pounds as he stands and walks away without looking back, leaving her on the couch wrapped in his jacket that still holds his warmth, aching with want and confusion and the imprint of his mouth on hers. The next morning, Alexander is coldly professional when Emma encounters him in the kitchen, his expression carefully neutral as he pours coffee and discusses security protocols with Philip Langley as though nothing happened between them the previous night, as though he didn't kiss her until she forgot her own name, and the deliberate distance he places between them feels like a physical barrier that makes Emma's chest ache with confused longing and frustration she has no right to feel. She tries to focus on Nicholas, taking him to the penthouse's private terrace for his morning lessons. The space transformed into a makeshift classroom with books and art supplies she requested, and they work through math problems using colorful blocks while the spring sun warms the stone tiles and the city sprawls below them, safely distant behind bulletproof glass railings. Nicholas chatters about his favorite animals and asks Emma to help him draw a lion, his small hand gripping the crayon with intense concentration, and then he looks up at her with those dark eyes so like his father's and asks if she'll stay forever, the innocent question piercing through her chest like a blade. Emma's throat tightens because she doesn't know how to answer honestly, doesn't know how to explain that she can't stay in this gilded cage indefinitely, no matter how comfortable it becomes. But leaving means never seeing Nicholas again, never hearing his laugh or reading him bedtime stories or watching his face light up when he masters a new skill, never seeing Alexander. When did that start mattering so much, she wonders? When did the crime lord with blood on his hands become someone whose absence would leave a wound she couldn't heal? Alexander watches them from his office window, tormented by the domestic scene that represents everything he can't have, shouldn't want, and James Crawford stands beside him reviewing intelligence reports and warns quietly that Alexander is getting too attached, that Emma is a liability. They should relocate somewhere safer and more distant before the situation becomes more complicated than it already is. Alexander's hands clench into fists, and he nearly hits James for suggesting it, violence rising hot and immediate at the thought of sending Emma away, and his lieutenant steps back with knowing eyes because Alexander's reaction proves his point more effectively than any argument could. That evening, Philip Langley enters the office with new intelligence, his expression grim as he reports they've identified the kidnapping plot's architect, Thomas Ravenscroft, making a move for Alexander's territory, with the precision of someone who's been planning this offensive for months, and taking Nicholas was meant to force Alexander's hand, destabilize his control, create the opening Ravenscroft needs to strike at the Empire's vulnerable points. Now they know Emma is important to the Montague household, and she becomes leverage too, another weakness to exploit, another way to hurt Alexander where he's most vulnerable. Alexander makes a brutal decision with the cold calculation that's kept him alive this long, telling Philip he'll end this tomorrow night, meet Ravenscroft directly in neutral territory, and settle this permanently the way these things have always been settled, with violence and finality. He doesn't tell Emma the meeting will likely turn violent, potentially fatal, doesn't mention that Ravenscroft won't come alone, or that Alexander is walking into a situation where the odds aren't favorable but necessary, because some threats can't be managed or contained, only eliminated. Emma senses something is wrong the moment she sees Alexander standing in his study that evening, shoulders tense as he looks out over the city with the posture of a man preparing for battle. And when he turns to acknowledge her presence, his expression is carefully controlled in a way that makes her stomach twist with foreboding, because she's learned to read the subtle shifts in his features, the way he locks down emotion when the stakes are highest. He tells her it's just business when she asks what's happening tomorrow, his tone dismissive in a way that feels like goodbye, and every instinct she's honed over weeks of living in his world screams that he's lying, that whatever he's planning is dangerous in ways he won't articulate. She waits until Nicholas is asleep, his small body relaxed under blankets covered in cartoon dinosaurs, and then she returns to the study and closes the door behind her with enough force that Alexander looks up from the documents he's reviewing. Strategic maps and photographs she doesn't want to examine too closely. She demands the truth, her voice steadier than she feels, and something in her expression must convince him she won't accept evasion, because his jaw tightens, and he tells her flatly that he's meeting Ravenscroft tomorrow night, that by this time in 24 hours, this will be over, one way or another. The finality in his voice terrifies her more than any explicit threat could, the resignation underlying his certainty, and she realizes with cold clarity that he's preparing for the possibility he won't return, that he's making this choice, knowing the odds aren't in his favor, but seeing no alternative that doesn't endanger Nicholas and her, and everyone else caught in the crossfire of his world. Emma crosses the study and grabs his arm, surprising them both with the vehemence of her grip, her fingers digging into expensive suit fabric as she tells him she can't let him go into danger like this. Not now, not when everything between them has shifted into something she doesn't have words for but feels with terrifying intensity. Alexander turns to face her fully and cups her face with unexpected tenderness, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones as he explains quietly that he has to protect his son, protect her, that this is the only way he knows to keep them safe from a threat that won't stop until someone ends it permanently. Emma kisses him with desperate urgency before he can say anything else, trying to pour everything she can't articulate into the contact, all her fear and need and the realization that somewhere in these weeks she fell for a criminal who should represent everything she opposes, but instead has become essential in ways that remake her understanding of herself. This time, Alexander doesn't pull away or offer protests about what she deserves. Instead, he responds with matching intensity, his arms wrapping around her as he lifts her easily, kissing her deeply as he carries her from the study to his bedroom, a space she's never entered before that smells like him and feels intimate in ways that make her heart race. They make love with intense passion, layered over underlying sorrow, both knowing this might be their only night, that tomorrow could steal this fragile thing they've built from danger and proximity and choice, and Emma memorizes every sensation, the heat of his skin against hers, the way he whispers her name like prayer, the surprising gentleness in hands that have done violence she can't fully comprehend. Afterward, she lies against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong, memorizing the feel of his arms around her and the rise and fall of his breathing. And Alexander holds her like she's precious and breakable, his fingers tracing patterns on her spine. He whispers that meeting her changed something fundamental in him, cracked open possibilities he thought died with Sophia, made him want impossible things like normal mornings and futures that extend beyond the next crisis. And his voice catches on the admission because wanting makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability in his world is often fatal. And Emma turns her face up to his and tells him fiercely to come back to her, to them, that Nicholas needs his father, and she needs whatever this is between them, to have the chance to become something neither of them can name yet, but both recognize as rare. Alexander promises to try, and she hears the caveat in those words, the acknowledgement that trying might not be enough, but she accepts it because it's all he can offer, and more honest than false certainty would be. Alexander leaves before dawn while Emma sleeps, slipping from the bed with the practiced silence of someone who's lived with danger too long, and she wakes to cold sheets and his absence like a physical ache, her hand searching the space where his warmth still lingers in expensive fabric that smells like him and goodbye. The day passes in agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into eternity as Emma tries to maintain normalcy for Nicholas, reading him stories and helping him build elaborate block towers that he crashes with delighted laughter. But the boy senses her anxiety the way children always do, his small face growing serious as he asks if his daddy will be home for dinner, and Emma has to force brightness into her voice when she promises he will, though she has no certainty, no control, nothing but hope that feels fragile as glass. She keeps checking her phone obsessively, the screen remaining blank and unhelpful. No messages or updates because Alexander's world doesn't include reassuring texts during operations that could end in death, and the not knowing gnaws at her until she thinks she might shatter from the tension, coiling tighter in her chest with each passing hour. Evening falls over the city in shades of purple and gold, beautiful and uncaring, and Emma paces the penthouse living room while Nicholas finally sleeps in his room, exhausted from her determined distraction, and Philip Langley remains stationed by the windows with his weapon visible and his expression professionally blank, refusing to answer her questions about Alexander's location or status with a courtesy that barely masks his own concern. Near midnight, Emma hears sudden commotion in the foyer, voices sharp with urgency, and footsteps moving fast, and her heart stops completely, time suspending as Philip moves toward the door with his hand on his weapon, and she thinks this is it. This is when they tell me he's dead. This is when everything breaks. Then Alexander walks through the door and Emma's knees nearly buckle with relief so intense it borders on pain, because he's alive, torn suit and blood on his knuckles and exhaustion carved into every line of his face, but alive and whole, and here. She runs to him without thinking, without caring that Philip and two other guards witness her desperation, and Alexander catches her, his arms wrapping tight as he buries his face in her hair and breathes her in like oxygen after drowning. And she feels him trembling minutely, adrenaline crash and relief and something that might be shock at having survived when survival wasn't guaranteed. He tells her quietly that Ravenscroft is dead, the threat ended, though she hears in his voice that the cost was heavy in ways he won't articulate. Blood spilled and decisions made that will haunt him in the small hours when sleep won't come. Alexander's hands shake as he holds Emma, unusual vulnerability in someone so controlled, and she pulls back enough to see his eyes and recognizes the darkness there, the violence still fresh and the part of him that frightens her, because it's capable of things her sheltered life never prepared her to understand. But she doesn't let go, doesn't retreat from what he is and what he's done. Instead, she takes his damaged hands in hers and leads him to the bathroom, turning on warm water and gathering supplies with steady purpose. And Alexander watches her tend his wounds with gentle efficiency, cleaning split knuckles and a cut along his jaw that will bruise by morning, and he's overwhelmed by her acceptance. by the fact that she sees the monster in him and chooses to stay anyway, offering grace he doesn't deserve and didn't know he desperately needed until this moment. The next morning arrives with pale sunlight filtering through bulletproof glass, and Emma wakes in Alexander's bed to find him already awake, propped on one elbow watching her with an expression she can't quite read, something vulnerable and resolved simultaneously. And when he speaks, his voice is quiet but firm as he tells her she's safe now, free to return to her life, the threat eliminated and her normal existence waiting to reclaim her. The offer is genuine. She can hear that in the careful control of his tone, though it clearly costs him something significant to make it. His jaw tight and his eyes searching hers for a reaction he both hopes for and dreads. Emma sits up slowly, pulling the sheet around herself, and looks past him through the open bedroom door to where she can see into the main living area. Nicholas already awake and sitting at the breakfast bar with Philip watching over him, the boy chattering animatedly about something while he draws with the colored pencils she bought him 3 days ago, his small face alight with the uncomplicated joy of childhood that she helped restore after weeks of him being too quiet, too watchful, too aware of dangers he shouldn't have to understand at 5 years old. She looks back at Alexander watching her with carefully guarded hope buried beneath practiced neutrality. This powerful, dangerous man who built empires from violence but trembles when he holds his son, who killed to protect them last night but touches her like she might break, who offered her freedom when she knows he wants desperately for her to choose captivity. She thinks about her small apartment waiting across the city, the familiar walls and modest furniture and quiet solitary evenings that used to feel like peace, but now would taste like loneliness. Thinks about her classroom and her routines, and the safety of being alone, where no one can hurt you because no one gets close enough to matter. Then she thinks about Nicholas's laugh, the way it sounds like bells and fills spaces in her heart she didn't know were empty. Thinks about Alexander's rare, unguarded smiles that transform his severe features into something almost boyish. Thinks about feeling needed and cherished, and part of something larger than her careful, self-contained existence. And she realizes the choice isn't really a choice at all, because somewhere between fighting for a stranger's child and tending a criminal's wounds, she stopped being alone and started being essential. She tells Alexander she wants to stay, watching his eyes flare with relief and something deeper, but she adds firmly that it has to be on her terms. She won't be hidden away like a shameful secret or a possession to protect. She'll continue teaching and living authentically, and if she's part of Nicholas's life, part of his life, it has to be real and acknowledged, no half measures or temporary arrangements. Alexander agrees without hesitation, the words coming fast like he's afraid she'll retract the offer, and a weight visibly lifts from his expression as he pulls her close and promises against her hair to protect her always, to deserve the gift she's giving him, though he knows he never fully can, to build something real from the impossible foundation of violence and danger that brought them together. Emma kisses him, tasting promise and hope, and the salt of tears she didn't realize were falling. And then Nicholas's voice cuts through the moment, the boy having noticed them awake and running over demanding a group hug with the imperious certainty of a child who knows he's loved. They fold him between them on the bed, Alexander's arms wrapping around them both, and Emma feels something click into place, 3 broken pieces forming an unlikely whole, a family forged from danger and choice rather than biology and convention. She knows challenges await, that Alexander's world will never be simple or safe, that loving him means accepting darkness alongside light, but looking at the 2 people